Good afternoon and welcome to this edition of Border Report Live. My name is Rudy Mireles and I am your host here in Harlingen, Texas in the Rio Grande Valley of deep South Texas. Got a lot to talk about today in just a few minutes. Our South Texas correspondent Sandra Sanchez is going to be joining us to talk about a couple different things happening down here in her area of responsibility. But first, let's go ahead and take a look at what's making news across the border. Starting with a federal judge in Chicago seems to be getting more upset with federal agents taking part in immigration raids. We told you about Judge Sarah Ellis yesterday, and on Monday she did say that the top Border Patrol agent in the ongoing immigration crackdown in Chicago area must sit down to answer questions about agents' use of force during those operations. Now, this happened despite her order to use discretion when using chemical agents on protesters and journalists. The ruling came in response to a lawsuit filed by a group of journalists, protesters, and clergy against the Trump administration. They all accuse the agents of using excessive force and deploying chemical agents against peaceful protesters and journalists covering those protesters. Border Patrol Chief Gregory Bovino and two others have been ordered to answer questions from the plaintiff's attorneys for up to 2 hours each regarding federal agents' use of force in the Chicago immigration enforcement operation known as Operation Midway Blitz. In other news, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals in Oregon ruled Monday that the Trump administration can deploy the National Guard to Portland. The three-judge panel made the decision after attorneys representing Oregon and the U.S. Department of Justice made their arguments earlier this month. The decision comes as state leaders fight against the federalization of Oregon state troops by the Trump administration to the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement Facility in South Portland. Earlier this month, U.S. District Judge Karen Immergut ruled in favor of the Oregon's proposed restraining orders, saying the relatively small protests in Portland do not justify the use of federalized forces. She also said allowing the deployment could harm Oregon's state sovereignty. However, that case was appealed by the Trump administration. Also happening, Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem defended a contract to spend more than $170 million on new jets for the U.S. Coast Guard, including one that she's going to use for her travel. Democratic lawmakers are criticizing the Homeland Security Secretary for entering into a contract to build the jets amid the government shutdown. Noem said the funding was previously appropriated in the so-called Big Beautiful Bill. The funding for the jets came from a last-minute line item inserted into congressional appropriations back in May. Two Democratic lawmakers sent Noem a letter wanting more information about the jets. And in part, that letter states the Coast Guard entered into a sole source contract with Gulfstream Aerospace Corporation to procure two new G700 luxury jets to support travel for you and the deputy secretary at a cost to the taxpayer of $200 million. Noem says stays in Coast Guard housing after she received death threats, with the secretary staying in housing traditionally reserved for the Coast Guard's commandant. And I wanted to bring in our South Texas correspondent, Sandra Sanchez. Now, Sandra, you spoke with Congressman Cuellar about a couple different things. Henry Cuellar, Texas, here in the Rio Grande Valley, district here in the Rio Grande Valley, and about a couple different things, but you did ask him about this case with the Secretary Noem and these jets. What did he have to say?
Yeah, right, Rudy. Good to be here. Today I spoke to Congressman Cuellar. Now, he was at one point chairman of the House Appropriations Homeland Security Committee. He is a senior member now. He's not, he was a ranking member before, and he said today that they are going to be looking into the costs of, it's expected to be $170 million for the one Gulfstream and up to $200 million for the other airplane that will be used by the Coast Guard. As you know, the Coast Guard got $25 billion in the Big Beautiful Bill for its budget for fiscal year 2026. That's the most ever. That agency Kristi Noem has really been increasing the profile of that agency, saying it's necessary to defend the southern border.
You know, speaking of that, you were the only journalist that got to tag along with Coast Guard today. I mean, we've talked about you going out there before, but they had a new operation spinning up today. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, actually, they didn't let me tag along. I just invited myself. I was, can you smell me? I've been out in the field all day. Standing there with my camera. We actually have some wonderful video that I shot today. So this is Operation River Wall. Yesterday, Noem last evening announced that they are going to surge 100 Coast Guard boats to begin with, and hundreds of personnel along the Rio Grande in the Rio Grande Valley, 250 miles of it. Look, I saw 7 boats there. Now, there is one Border Patrol boat there. As you know, Coast Guard is part of the Department of Homeland Security as well, with Border Patrol and Customs and Border Protection. And I did get permission to be on that ridge there overlooking. This is the only dock. It's in Mission, Texas. And I kind of knew that that's where they would be launching these boats. And I got lucky and saw several of them. At one point, I did ask Coast Guard official, is this part of Operation Riverwall? They did respond, yes, ma'am. But, other than that, they wouldn't stand and pose for the camera. But you can just, can I use the word flotilla? They're just coming and coming, right? I know you were in the military, Rudy. I wasn't. But there's Border Patrol. They also had some DHS officials who were coming to examine the area, I was told, to look at what, and I'm suspecting it has to do with this Operation River Wall. Let me tell you, Secretary Noem said that the men and women of the U.S. Coast Guard are experts at defending America's maritime border. She said that Coast Guard Force Rio Grande and Operation River Wall will be a force multiplier in defending against illegal immigration. She also said in a statement, it's really important to stop drugs from coming. Right there, you can see Mexico is on the right. Mm-hmm. I'm standing just across. This is Mission, Texas, and they were just lining up boat after boat after boat, passing weapons and people walking through to get to the pier. They were actually bringing in 2 more Coast Guard boats when I left. And, this section of the Rio Grande goes to a dam, Ansel Dewis area, Ansel Dewis Park. There's a dam there, and then Falcon Dam. This is really the only place to launch in between. Now, they said 260 miles. It is 250 miles in Hidalgo and Cameron County, so it could be that either they made a mathematical error and said 260 instead of 250, or they're including 10 miles in Starr County, which very well might be. Rio Grande City is an area where a lot of drugs come through.
I was going to say, it seems like that would take you almost to Rio Grande City, Roma area if you included those extra 10 miles.
Yeah.
There.
So I'm wondering if that isn't some of what it is. But like you mentioned, we rode with a Coast Guard just a couple months ago with a photographer here at KVEO. This is the Chimney Hills Park area. They come down and, they just launch into the water, and we watched all the people on the Mexican side waving at the Coast Guard. The U.S. side was very empty. And once again, this huge launch in the water is happening at a time when the numbers are very low.
Yeah.
I think the video kind of froze there a little bit.
There we go. It's
okay.
Moving, yeah.
But they're saying that this is necessary and that they have the funds.
And let me ask you, you said it was, they said 260, could be 250, somewhere in between, we'll call it 255. How many boats exactly are there going to, did they say how many they're planning to launch?
Yeah, they're going to start with 100 Coast Guard boats and hundreds of personnel. Used to be, we didn't really even know the Coast Guard was on the Rio Grande. Mm-hmm. That was kind of a surprise. Yeah. A few months ago, I ran into them. They were testing some new equipment, and then that's how we got with the ride-along, and, then we had a fly-along with them. Like I said, they're really raising the profile of this agency, and Noem especially is, saying that they can do so much to protect the maritime borders, and they have such experience, and, this agency falls under her direction. So,
what's interesting about this is if you do the math, 100 boats, 250 miles, that's 2.5 miles of an area of responsibility for each boat. They're talking about bringing more boats, but that's not counting the Border Patrol boats that are already out there on the water going back and forth. I know down here in Brownsville, we've seen them, and obviously up by Rio Grande City and here at this boat launch, as you mentioned.
So what you're looking at right there, the boat closest to Mexico is a Border Patrol boat. The other ones are Coast Guard boats. So they're kind of intermixed. They work together. We knew that. So yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's a lot of coverage. It also kind of makes you wonder why, regardless of which side of all this enforcement you're on, it also makes you kind of wonder, why is this the first time we're actually kind of, seeing this increase in mission? These guys, as you said, these folks rather, they are specialists at protecting the water, protecting our coasts. When you rode along with Coast Guard, what kind of, mission exactly did they say they were doing? Because we know Border Patrol's out there, obviously, as a deterrent factor, but they're doing a lot of rescues as well, those high water rescues when people get swept away. Is the Coast Guard kind of going to do that, or are they going to focus on enforcement?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Rescues are certainly part of it. Every one of them is highly trained and qualified to help anyone on the water. But they're also I want to compare it to the National Guard on land, the eyes and the ears, and they convey information. They're additional boots in the field for the Border Patrol. Well, on the water, that's what I see the Coast Guard as. Now, obviously they got this huge infusion of monies, and Noem has high plans for this agency, and this is just today. This is obvious. I have never seen so many boats on the Rio Grande. So you're just seeing it. The video's a little raw, but we just got back with it. And so, this is definitely something that we will be watching. And I didn't see any arrests, don't see anybody else. Those people on the land, they're actually DHS officials who came to watch this.
Yeah, from a militarization perspective, I think the question that needs to be asked now, are these people going to be down here permanently, or are they just kind of down here on a temporary duty order? I know a lot of the folks, we have a small station on South Padre Island, a small Coast Guard station there, but I know a lot of these folks are probably coming from like the Corpus Christi area, no?
Actually, the crew we rode with came from New Orleans.
Oh, wow.
And Houston. So, I don't know if they're restationing people, moving them here, but I think we're talking 100 boats. Each boat has several people, to launch it, to ride on it. So we are talking about a big force of people.
Yeah, because if that is a temporary deployment, like we've seen these troops coming in, and I just wanted to add a little context to this from my experience, that's an operational tempo that is hard to keep up, especially when you're not used to deploying in these situations on a consistent basis. Not to take away from what the Coast Guard does, obviously, but it is difficult to do. While you're sending folks downrange, wherever that may be, either to the Rio Grande or to in Iraq or in Afghanistan, you still got to have people back at home maintaining the day-to-day, still keeping up with the training, make sure everyone's doing their their PowerPoint presentations and all of that as well. So it'll be interesting to see what comes from this. Who knows? Maybe the Rio Grande Valley will see an expansion of the Coast Guard station down here.
And they're redoing the Coast Guard station out on South Padre Island. They're revamping that. One other thing to kind of add to this story today, when I spoke to Congressman Cuellar, we know that the Coast Guard are being paid. They were part of the military that were also, money was set aside for them. But what I learned today was the $10 billion also include Border Patrol, paying Border Patrol agents, Customs and Border Protection officers, ICE agents, law enforcement personnel, but not support staff. So, we've been thinking that on these people working the lines, aside from Coast Guard and military, were not being paid. But today he said, no, they are being paid. And he said, as they rightly should. We can see they're visibly working here. So just some more information as we follow the shutdown, as it is tied for second longest in history and U.S. history. And, we do know that we do have, and perhaps this is a reason that they're using a lot of Coast Guard, because we know that they're getting paid. But we do know also that Border Patrol are being paid as well.
Yeah, and as far as the military, we still see the deployment. We just talked about it. I think it was yesterday. All the days are kind of running together already. It's one of those weeks, but I think about those Michigan troops, Michigan Army National Guard troops making their way down here for a sixth time since 2020. So, all these troops, it's kind of coming from all directions right down here to the Rio Grande Valley and across the entire U.S. southern border. All right, well, we're going to take a very, very quick break, and when we return, we're going to talk about another type of entry, which is the port of an expansion of a couple bridges, or a bridge down here in the Rio Grande Valley.
Fast-tracking bridge permitting.
All righty, well, stay with us. Border Report Live is back in 1 minute. And welcome back to this edition of Border Report Live. My name is Rudy Mideles. I'm your host here in Harlingen, Texas, and joining me right now, Sandra Sanchez, our South Texas correspondent. Sandra, we were talking a little bit about, before the break, about this fast tracking to expand international bridges. What can you tell us?
Yeah, and I know that we have a package we're going to run, but just to set it up, right now, currently only 3 South Texas counties have this special fast track permitting. Cameron, where we are, Webb, and Maverick. But U.S. Senator Ted Cruz says the Senate has passed legislation that, if it makes it through the House and signed by the president, would expand it to the northern and the southern borders.
A provision tucked into the National Defense Authorization Act in 2023 allowed new international bridges with Mexico to be quickly built or expanded in 3 South Texas border counties. That special fast-track rule has resulted in 7 new international bridge projects started in Maverick, Webb, and Cameron counties.
When these bridges are completed, it will result in thousands of new jobs, high-paying jobs throughout the Rio Grande Valley and all throughout South Texas.
But Texas Senator Ted Cruz says that law just expired, so he has proposed an amendment in the current NDA Act that would extend this special fast-track bridge permitting process to 2030 and to more borderlands.
Is this just still Webb, Maverick, and Cameron counties, or does this extend?
This extends more broadly to international bridges. It extends to international bridges both at the Mexico border and the Canadian border. And so it takes the principle that we applied in Texas that specified the 4 bridges in Laredo, Eagle Pass, and Brownsville and extends it to the entirety of the border.
The measure passed the Senate last week, but the House of Representatives has a different version. Cruz says he hopes both chambers will agree to the importance of increasing trade, like in 2023 when he worked with Democrats to pass it.
Every year, the United States does roughly $800 billion worth of trade and commerce with the nation of Mexico. South Texas, an enormous number of jobs depend upon robust trade and commerce going across those bridges.
If passed, it would allow presidential permits to be issued before all environmental studies are completed. If environmental concerns are raised, Cruz says they must be addressed before the bridges are built.
So you see that, it is expected that some form of this will pass. I don't think they're going to let this drop, although it has expired technically. Right now, as you know, the House is not in session because of the government shutdown. They're not there voting on it. So, but Cruz says he is confident, and he actually worked with Henry Cuellar in 2023 to get this first legislation, kind of trial balloon legislation across. But he wants to extend it to the entire southern and northern border. Rudy, that would be 75 international bridges and plus like 15 rail international bridges that could be affected, almost 100 international bridges. We have here one project that is just going to be a pedestrian bridge, for instance. We have a futuristic rail bridge in Laredo that's going to be put up. 7 projects just in these 3 counties. Basically, it allows them to get started. It allows them to do the planning, start the construction while the environmental process is ongoing. If at some point they discover that there are some concerns, there's an endangered species that they've run into, they have to halt it under NEPA, the National Environmental Protection Act. They still have to follow those rules, but they can work at the same time. Normally, it takes about 2 years to get the NEPA data through. And so basically they're saying we're going to work together so we don't have to keep waiting forever. So if he gets this through, it would extend this fast tracking to 2030.
Have you heard anything about the kind of skipping the environmental process from these environmental groups? I know we've had a few different folks. Jim Chapman, for example, we've talked to him about this kind of subject before. Have they kind of been speaking out about this?
Of course, there's concerns, but at this point, everybody's saying, all of the leaders, the officials are saying that, all the documents still have to be filed. Everything has to be reviewed. Nothing is going to be skipped. We are 2 years into this. They're expanding the World Trade Bridge, for instance, by 10 lanes. So far, I've heard of no complaints. It's a project that is kind of like side by side to the existing project. But again, you're going to be expanding onto new lands. There could be some type of animal that they find, some concerns that water pollution that could happen. But so far, that seems to be going fine. And as he mentioned, $800 billion a year in trade. And, that is just on the southern border. Mm-hmm. So what could be potential for the northern border?
And, it's interesting, too, because as we've discussed here on the program on Border Report Live, that, there's been these changes for Mexican truckers or truckers who don't speak English as their primary language to kind of stop them from, traveling within the U.S. if they're not proficient enough to read whatever it may be, stop signs or signage or these things. And we know here in Texas, for example, DACA recipients will not be able to renew their CDLs to drive trucks. So the one thing that really piqued my interest about this is that you had mentioned the rail bridge expansions. Is there any other, kind of talk about maybe building more rail? I know there had been at one point out towards El Paso, but did the senator mention anything about that?
No, he didn't. But, and I think we've mentioned it before, this futuristic rail that they're going to build, that they're looking to build in Laredo is basically completely AI. It's completely robots. And they will fill these boxes. They will go over. They will be, and it'll be on top of the existing rail bridge. They're going to have these lanes. The animation is very futuristic, crazy. I think that if that one works, I think we're going to see more of those along the border, southern and northern. I think it's something to watch.
Yeah, and after we talked about that story a couple weeks ago, or might have been a couple months ago now, but when we talked about that, I kind of realized something, that it's very similar to what you're seeing in these major ports when we're talking about shipping ports like Los Angeles, New York, Long Island area, even Houston. A lot of automation happening there, so it's almost like rail is now catching up to what ships have been doing a little bit.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, so interesting stuff there. Well, we're going to take a very quick break, and we have a couple more things to talk about when we come back. So stay with us. Border Report Live is back in 1 minute. And welcome back to Border Report Live. My name is Rudy Mideles, your host here in Harlingen, Texas, in the Rio Grande Valley of deep South Texas. Bringing our South Texas correspondent, Sandra Sanchez, in one more time. As if you haven't been busy enough today, we're going to basically make the whole show about you.
Love it.
Well, tell us a little bit about some new fees when it comes to some of these humanitarian parole, is it?
Yeah, crazy. They have announced, this was in the Federal Register, that every migrant who receives humanitarian parole after last Thursday, October 16th, will pay a $1,000 fee for this parole. In the past, there was no fees. And there were fees if they wanted to be on something called alternatives to detention, and that's completely different. This is just to be released. And so this does not include anyone who is just applying for it. What will be really interesting is there are many people who are in detention facilities currently. They want to be released on parole. Now, will DHS suddenly be releasing a lot of people at the option of, well, you pay the federal government $1,000 a head? We could see that happening. We might not, but we could. It's we've been waiting for lots of releases, and there have been every month when CBP releases their numbers, they brag that there have been no catch and release, that everyone is who comes across the border is put into detention or returned. I mean, they're just not tagging them and releasing them as the Biden administration had done, under their protocols for years. But there are some exceptions to this $1,000 fee. If someone has a medical emergency and they can't wait to apply and get the visa and everything, they would not be charged if it's a life-threatening medical emergency, or if their parents, they're the parents or guardians of someone who is having a life-threatening medical emergency. If the non-citizen who has applied is donating an organ or another tissue for transplant and they need to be admitted into the United States to give this organ, they don't have to pay the fee. Or if they have the relative whose death is imminent and that relative is in the United States, then they don't have to pay that fee. Or if they're attending a funeral of a close family member, or if they have an adopted child with an urgent medical condition. So the only other exception is if they are coming to attend a U.S. immigration court hearing, they don't have to pay that fee. So But, you know, that's a big price for migrants to pay, especially when they won't have a work permit, right?
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I feel like you were carrying us all today on the program.
Thanks for having me, Rudy.
All righty. Well, before we go, did want to remind you that sometimes maybe you can't watch a Border Report live episode. Well, that's all right, because you can stay informed on the stories shaping the U.S.-Mexico border while you're on your commute home, while you're walking the dog, maybe you're out back, maybe you're getting a workout in, because Border Report Live now brings you real-time updates, expert insights, and voices from both sides of the border in podcast form. You can get it on Apple Podcasts, the iHeartRadio app, Spotify, as well as YouTube. So make sure to go on one of those 4 apps there at the bottom of your screen, download it, and like and subscribe to the Border Report Live podcast. For Sandra Sanchez, my name is Rudy Mideles. Have a great day.